Hey guys, so just on the way back from what we call a Farbrengen, it's a get together of Jews. In this particular case, an auspicious night. It is the anniversary of the release from prison of the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe. You always get the feeling that Chabad is full of these what's called yontifs, these holidays, where some Rebbe went to prison and got released. So what is this, like a, some kind of a weird ex-con, Jewish ex-con sect? No, my friends, it's people who, fight to keep Judaism alive in a place like Russia, whether it's in the time of the Tsar or in the time of communism, in the time of this and in the time of that. You're gonna get these kind of things. In this particular case, guys, this was an imprisonment of the sixth Rebbe in the early 20s, right when there was a really direct attack on on the Torah, on Judaism, on religion in general by the communist administration. And it's crazy because there was even something called Yevsektia, which is a bunch of Jews in name only, Erev Rav, who were the ones coming at religious Jews. And so the sixth Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, fought all that, and he fought to keep Judaism alive. And honestly, guys, why do we still celebrate it? Because if it wasn't for him, there would not have been these clandestine groups that continued, to keep Judaism alive, even after, let's say, the death of Stalin, to the point where, and the rabbi explained it today, where the KGB had a very, very extensive file specifically on what they called the Schneersonites. The Schneersonite group, the Lubavitchers, who kept Judaism alive in Russia, in the Soviet Union. And again, this got to the point, guys, where they were tracking all the stuff that was going on vis-a-vis America when the sixth Rebbe, this is already in the 50s when the sixth Rebbe, in the 40s, came to America, and they were tracking all this stuff. So you could say, what do they care? This is stuff that's already going on in America. But no, this is influencing what's going on in Russia and the Soviet Union with all the Jews, and they were keeping tabs on it. Any Chabadnik, and then in the 60s and 70s, who would come to the Soviet Union bringing tefillin, bringing, all kinds of things, mezuzot, tefillin, Tanya, etc. My friends, this is a big day. This tracks all the way back to fighting the Yevsektia stuff, fighting the beginning of communism, and then going into the years of Stalin, and then going into the years of the, post-Stalin era, and we end up now with Soviet Jewry, or former Soviet Jewry, being influenced, and I include myself in this, guys, being influenced by Chabad. And I always tell my friends who grew up religious, who grew up not Chabad, or who grew up just like, modern Orthodox or whatever you call it. Doesn't matter where they grew up, in Israel or in America. I always tell them, you need to understand that if it wasn't for Chabad, I would be nowhere in terms of this whole thing. It doesn't mean I have to be Chabad necessarily, or any person has to become Chabad. In my case, guys, I'm what we call Chabad adjacent. There was always going to be that connection because, again, I think I mentioned it before, My father's father is from a place called Berdichev, which is, there's a direct connection to Lubavitch Rebbe. They were in-laws. The Alter Rebbe and Levi Yitzhak Berdichev were in-laws. Their connection to Chabad. And there's always going to be that connection. So it's a big day, guys, for Soviet, not only for Soviet Jewry, but in general, but in particular for Soviet Jewry. You look at everything that's going on now, guys. I mean, if you think about, what they just had recently, where some of the Jews in Iran were arrested, and then they, arrested for, they thought they were spies, and so who was instrumental in working a deal to have them released? Some of them. It was Rabbi Ber Lazar, who's in Russia, right? So all this stuff that goes on to this day. Again, not that I'm a fan of Putin. Don't get me wrong. I'm not. I'm just telling you that Chabad has an influence, whether it's in Russia, all these back channels, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's in other places, right? And it doesn't even matter if a Jew is Russian or Ukrainian or, Persian. It doesn't matter, guys. It's interesting. When my parents and I were on the way to the States, one of the places we stopped at, we lived in, was Italy, right? It's a well-known thing. Soviet Jews went through Austria, then to Italy. And in Italy, some people stayed longer than not, We were there for like 2.5 or 3 months. And I believe we got there in August, and then we finally left in November. We got to America on November 19th, so 1987. So, so when we were there, I don't remember, I was a kid, my mother tells me there were Persian Jews with us traveling. For whatever reason, they had to go through Italy. And Soviet Jews were given, we were allowed to take out like 300 rubles, which is equivalent to like basically $300, right? We had to pay to get out, and then only allowed, $300 and I don't know, clothes on our backs, suitcases, and whatever, pots and pans. So these Persian Jews, they're coming with like everything they have, and rugs and this and that, and they have all their wealth, and they're looking at us, and they're like, "You guys are Jewish?" They literally said, "You guys are Jewish? We don't believe it." They're like, "Yeah, why?" And they're like, "Why are you guys so poor? Where's all your money?" So if you guys kind of look at the situation today, dynamic between different, Jews with different backgrounds, it's kind of a funny statement to make, right? They couldn't understand why are we so, where the heck's our money, folks? If anybody had any money to begin with, any Jew had any money to begin with in the Soviet Union, it was taken away. But most Jews didn't even have that much money, right? In our case, actually, we kind of did. My grandmother did, because whatever. Because my grandfather worked at Army Supply, and then he managed to save up a lot of money after the war, starting from at the end of the war until basically, he passed away in 79, but then my grandmother inherited this whole whatever thing that accrued, even in the Soviet Union, it had bank accounts that accrued interest. So Baruch Hashem, she managed to take. She actually didn't take any of it out. It's a long story, but how it was sent to her. But kids people didn't have money. Soviet Jews did not have any money. Persians had money. So yet, my friends, we're all connected, right? So even to this day, the the work that the sixth Rebbe, we call him the previous Rebbe HaKodem in Hebrew, and also the seventh Rebbe, obviously, did is just if you look at all of the Torah that was learned, all of the mitzvot that was done, even here, if you look at all of the shidduchim that were made, all of the Russian-speaking Jews, even the ones who were not necessarily, who did programs that were not Chabad, right? All that stuff is because of the work the previous Rebbe and the seventh Rebbe did in Russia, because they at least gave people a tom, an understanding of the very least who they are. All that stuff that was done by like Natan Sharansky and all those dissidents, and I'm not discounting the stuff that was done by other rabbis of non-Chabad, right? Rabbi, I think it was Ilya Rips, and Eliyahu Rips, and Rabbi Esses, but there's a lot of rabbis who did a lot of things clandestinely, right? But in terms of spreading stuff around, you guys should read the book Samarkand. These are Ashkenazi Chabad rabbis who were opening mikvahs and opening all kinds of Jewish life secretly in Uzbekistan. It's in a place called Samarkand, in the city. It's absolutely insane. You should read the book. Like, talk about Mesiras Nefesh, guys. So, folks, without all this, Judaism for former Soviet Jews basically, largely, would not exist. The whole thing would, and if you want to say, well, most Russian-speaking Jews are not religious, or they're secular, or some of them are anti, folks, so now think about that. But the ones that are very into it, are very hazak, and also the ones who are anti, or the ones who are disconnected, a lot of their kids are pro. A lot of their kids are reviving it. A lot of their kids are coming back, much to some of the people's chagrin, right? We know these stories. So, Baruch Hashem, not in my case, but not in the case of my family, thank God. But, that's what it is, guys. So, it's an auspicious day. It's a day for, guys, I'll end on this. And I think I mentioned this before. If you write SSSR, which is how you write USSR in Russian, SSSR, and then you write that out, or you spell that out in Hebrew, it's going to be Samach, 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 Resh. Samach, 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 Resh is 380. Samach 100, Samach 100, Samach 100, Resh 80, which is the same gematria as Mitzrayim. My friends, the Soviet Jews left the modern day Mitzrayim, and that means that this day, the one that we're celebrating tonight, 13th of Tamuz, is a day of Geula. It's for personal Geula, Hag Geula. Also national, could be national, but definitely personal. It's a very auspicious day for the redemption. It's a very auspicious day for the Mashiach, but also an auspicious day for you to have something, for a Jew to get something that they've been waiting for. Whether it's shidduch, whether it's parnasa, whether it's health, something, you're in a jam, you're in a corner. It's a good day for things to turn around, guys. And sometimes we have to just take the first steps for them to turn around. Or sometimes there's nothing to do, nothing for us to do but just dive into Hashem and ask Him, Hashem, it's time for the Geula. Alright guys, here's to leaving Mitzrayim and on to better things. Tov and good Yantav.